You're watching the JJ Podcast.
We recently met with Tony Abbott and touched on identity politics and the identity of Australia. Since our time with him, we've wanted to explore different areas of identity politics and thought we'd have another chat today. In this episode, we ask if identity politics is tearing society apart, its impact on the identity of Australia, whether or not it impacts free speech, identity politics seen in marketing, such as with Sydney Sweeney, the impact of labels and personal attacks in identity politics, and we discuss why we think identity politics is dangerous for our nation.
Well, we spoke to Tony Abbott last week and it was really about identity politics, and we wanted to just continue on this discussion because, Jaimee, in a way, identity politics is really tearing society apart.
Yeah, Jaimee, it is. I think my biggest concern with identity politics today is that I think there's two or three ways of looking at it. One, I really get upset with identity politics on an individual. So when people say they hate a political leader, and then when you ask them why, it's not about their policy or something they did in their career. It's an identity attack. That's one thing I don't like. The second thing I don't like is when identity politics, the peer pressure, I suppose, of identity politics is starting to make political parties go down a hole that I think you can't get out of. We're seeing that at the moment in this country with, I believe, with the Liberal Party, where you start chasing identity politics and minority groups when that's got nothing to do with what your job is. Your job's to govern the country and do what's right by the nation. The third thing I don't like about identity politics is that we're living in a time where people can jump online and believe anything they see because someone they like said it, an influencer or...
That was always something that was my concern during the last federal election, where Labor's headline was able to say, we will cut taxes, Liberals say no. Now, without reading that, I mean, besides the fact it was 70 cents a day, $5 a week was going to be the tax cut, but they were able to say that as a headline. And so people were taking that without actually reading the details.
The whole entire slogan of the election became
you pay, yeah. No,
he cuts, you pay. Yeah, it was. He cuts, you pay.
And it was Mediscare and nuclear. There were a lot of things going on here. But to your earlier point regarding when identity politics attacks an individual, that was also what we saw quite heavily throughout that last election as well, in terms of the Liberal leader at the time and Peter Dutton and the names that he was being called. I think one thing that we can all remember quite clearly was when we were bringing quite a lot of refugees from Gaza, and they were coming in quite quickly. It was about 3,000 at this point, and Peter Dutton just wanted to see what the vetting process was like, just to ensure that we weren't bringing in Hamas sympathisers.
Terrorists.
Yeah, we wanted to ensure that we weren't bringing that hatred and those Hamas sympathisers into Australia. And we saw the independent MP in Zali Steggall stood up and called him a racist because he was simply trying to do what was in the best interest for the country.
We heard you in silence. You can hear me in silence.
Order.
Stop being racist.
Leader of the opposition, order.
Well, it was an offensive and unparliamentary remark and it should be withdrawn.
Now, a name like that sticks.
It did stick. I had lots of people, our demographic, a lot of women, friends of mine, who said, we can't have a racist leading our country. I can't vote for him. He's a racist. It was actually a different point, though. When I said, why is he a racist? One of my friends said, I saw online, he said he's only going to stand in front of, if he's elected, he will only stand in front of the Australian flag. And I thought, oh my gosh, if that makes him a racist, what have we become?
Just on that, we're slightly veering off track here, but in terms of the Australian flag, and yes, that was something that was quite spoken about heavily during the campaign, which was probably not an election issue that should have been spoken about during the time.
Sure.
But, you now look at times where Anthony Albanese is making some really big decisions and having big press conferences. I'm looking at things like the social media ban under 16, where people from around the world are going to be watching what Australia is doing in that sense. So you're going to be watching your Prime Minister. He has just announced the two-state solution as well. But when he has made these big press conferences and announcements, he's standing in front of all of the different flags. And often when they zoom in on him, all you can see is the Torres Strait Islander flag. So people from around the world will be looking at that saying, who is he and where is he from? Like, what is that flag?
Yeah.
Now, there's certainly a place for the Aboriginal and the Torres Strait Islander flag. Absolutely.
Agreed.
But not when you're on a world stage representing Australia.
Yes.
It is so important that, especially now, that our country is so divided. We have so much hate going on right now. It is unbelievable. And to stand in front of 3 different flags, I think, is another way of just continuing to divide us. Just stand in front of the one flag. Just do it. Because that's Australia and that's who you represent. So stand in front of that one flag so that when you get that zoom in, you see the Australian flag.
Yes.
Like, be proud of it. Be proud to be the Prime Minister of Australia.
Absolutely. This is one of the things that Tony actually said last week. He said that he personally didn't understand why we are co-equally flying the flags of some against the flag of everyone. And that was the whole idea of the Australian flag. It was to represent everyone. And people should be proud of where they come from. We are a multicultural nation, and we've got people who have come to live here from almost all 200 countries around the world. And I love that. I absolutely love that we're a multinational, multi-ethnic country. But yes, please don't be afraid or embarrassed to fly the Australian flag. It should be something, it should be a symbol of unity. I don't know how we get back to that. I really don't.
Well, it probably starts with a leader to start having just the Australian flag, and then it sort of trickles down from there.
Yeah.
But I think back to identity politics. Do you think this does impact free speech?
I don't know if it impacts free speech, because I think that there is still more forums now than ever before with which our voice can be heard.
Your voice, or just are you there with your name attached to that voice? Because sometimes I think that's where online can be a bit of a dungeon, is that you can sit there and voice opinions, but you don't have to put your name to it. So sometimes that can be
that's not banning free speech. That's banning the integrity of the speech. And that was going to be my next point. I don't think free speech is being banned yet. I think there's definitely a road where that can happen. Many people are pushing. I mean, we saw that Zali Steggall, for example, pushed that bill in Parliament. It got shot down. But that we could have gone down that road of banning free speech, kind of. My issue with it right now, though, is that anyone can say anything.
We can literally look like Chris Bowen, who's our energy minister right now. He put out onto social media a video that was just full of blatant lies. And if you don't go and Google what he has said, because really, who has time to go and fact check everything that you hear? You would walk away believing that. And some of the things that he claimed in this video
were outrageous.
That last year, he says 92.5% of all new electricity in the world was renewable. And I think the biggest one was, he said, renewables overtook coal as the largest source of electricity in India.
False.
Now, that's false. Coal actually produced 6 times more electricity in India in the last financial year than solar and wind combined.
Correct.
But if you don't have time to go and do that, you would take it as fact, as what he has just said, especially if you're someone in his electorate who has voted him in, because he's obviously continues to get re-elected. So he is liked by his constituents. So you would believe what he's saying.
Exactly. I was saying the same thing to you only 2 days ago, because I saw people were posting stuff all over X saying that they had seen Zali Steggall on Sky News. I think this was on Sunday morning. And apparently she said, the reality is nuclear energy is in decline, not wanted anywhere, and wind and solar is here to replace it. Now, the truth is, nuclear around the world, yes, it was peaking from the late 1990s and the early noughties, and it has stagnated because there's obviously far more competition now with technologies, renewable technologies that have come into that space. But to say that nobody wants it, China is releasing more nuclear.
New York as well.
Yeah. There are even places like Germany. Yeah, so I just get frustrated because I saw that online and I thought, my gosh, did Zali really say that? Because I know that those little snippets, there's a bigger story. So I went and did my own research. But you're absolutely right. Who has time for that? And so people aren't doing their own research and they're just believing what they see. We can go on a completely different angle with this. Look at what happened recently with Sydney Sweeney.
Yes.
If you want to, if that falls into identity politics again.
The American Eagle Sydney Sweeney has good genes. Now, I personally thought it was a great ad.
Yeah.
I have a marketing background, for anyone that doesn't know, I love a good ad campaign. And I think the play on words, and I'm so glad that American Eagle have decided not to be apologetic and not to pull the ads
Why would
down.
they? Their sales have skyrocketed.
Exactly. Because what is wrong with seeing someone that they're having fun with words, the genes are great, and she is a stunningly beautiful woman, and that's what you like to see on some of the ads. I think it was really clever. She was called a Nazi because of her being blonde hair, blue eyes, and that's when you go down that really, I think, dangerous path, because that is a business, a brand that's trying to be out there, do something different, a play on words, and they were absolutely torn to shreds, but their sales skyrocketed.
And the thing that's interesting with this, Jaimee, is that it's not like American Eagle have only used blonde-haired, blue-eyed models. I think there would probably be a base for argument if every single model looked like that, and then people were getting a bit offended or saying, hey, where's your diversity, et cetera, et cetera. But they have used dark-skinned people before. Yeah. You know, they've used people that look completely different to Sydney Sweeney before. So, yeah, it was...
I think it was more just that saying she has good genes.
Yeah, well...
She does.
She does. I wish I had those genes.
Nothing wrong with it.
I'd take those genes.
She's a stunningly beautiful woman, and I think it was a very, very clever ad. You know, I think in terms of identity politics, it certainly is, the guilt is the oil that keeps identity politics moving. And that is why
Such a good quote.
Yeah. I'm reading that somewhere, and I thought that is so true, that guilt is the oil that keeps identity politics
I think there's
moving.
a lot we're doing in this day and age out of guilt. Or back to your comment on free speech, probably a lot we're not saying out of guilt. I mean, I feel very comfortable sitting here with you, telling you how proud I would be to wave the Australian flag, and, you know, that I'm happy to see welcome to country not be done as frequently as what it is. But then there are certain groups of people that I would be kind of terrified to say that around through fear of them, judging me, I guess.
Yeah, judging
I
you
suppose
or
that there's
attacking
that
you
fear
or...
of that cancel culture then, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, going back to the identity thing, I had a look recently at the 2012 Julia Gillard misogyny speech. It was one thing that I really wanted to mention to Tony last week during our time with him, and unfortunately we just didn't get a chance to. She made comments in that speech that were so outrageous. And that was it 12 or 13 years ago now, that speech? Yeah. And only a few years back, it got voted Australia's most unforgettable TV moment. And I thought, my gosh, and it went viral around the world, you know. But the whole basis of it was that she was trying to label him a misogynist or a sexist, right? But she says in that speech, I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. He doesn't need emotion, he needs a mirror. Every day, in every way, sexism and misogyny is all we have heard from him. And when I saw that part of the speech, I thought, that's such dramatic language. Every day, in every way, all we have heard is misogyny. I mean, it's just not true. The man stood up, he's been in Parliament for 20, 25 years giving speeches on all sorts of things. To say that every day in every way,
and
outrageous.
also, let's not forget why she was saying that speech too.
Well, yes. But people, this is the identity thing again, right? That latched on. And if you went and asked the majority of Australians now, oh, did you ever hear that Tony Abbott was called a misogynist? They'd say yes. And then if you said why, I'm not sure many of them could say that it was all to do with emotion about the Speaker of the House and, you know, sexual assault allegations. I don't think that, many people would actually remember the context of it.
Yeah.
And that just proves the identity part, right? The identity had more power.
Well, you get branded something and then it sticks.
Absolutely.
And it's often hard to shake that. Once you have a tag like that, it's very hard to shake that and move on and prove otherwise.
What about you, Jaimee? I mean, at the recent federal election, was there any part of you that went into it willing to run as a candidate thinking that you could be the target?
The biggest thing that I was concerned about, and I did sort of nip it in the butt right at the start, was the fact that I had worked in the wagering industry.
Okay.
And that does stick with you too. Even though you go on and do other things, you still have that. And I did have a lot of people slamming me online regarding it, but I think if you know that that's something that could pop up, but you do have to be, I did find that you do want to be careful that you don't upset people, but at the same time you still need to be very strong and stand your ground of what you believe in and try really hard not to, you know the fact you can't please everyone. But that is certainly something that plays into your mind, because it's the first time where you actually think, wow, I can really offend someone without intending to because I'm just being myself.
I had someone who I saw a guy during the election, and I mentioned that I had been working alongside you, or that you were a friend of mine, and he went, Tabcorp girl. And then I remember thinking, like, is there anything else you can say about her?
I had left that company years ago. I'd been at the ABC before as a journalist before I ran as a candidate, but people don't talk about that.
And it just goes to show if they had already decided that they didn't like perhaps your party, they're already closed off.
And I had
identity
lots of
already
men calling me a blonde bimbo who had never had a conversation with me ever, but they just assume because I've got blonde hair and blue eyes, female, I don't know. Straight away they just kept calling me a blonde bimbo, but they had never had a conversation with me in their lives. Yeah. And they purely based that association on, I'm assuming, how I looked. I don't know, because they never spoke to me. So why do you think identity politics is dangerous? And is there a way out of this? What's the way forward to move on from being branded or through this identity politics?
Yes, I think it's dangerous. I think it's dangerous because we live in a time where we don't see past it. We don't look and research and know that there's something deeper. Like I'll give you an example. At the recent federal election, I'm not for a minute suggesting that the Liberal Party had all the right policies and the right platform. They didn't. They didn't. Absolutely. They ran a terrible campaign. Yeah. And so there's no part of me that is trying to justify the fact that they probably deserve to lose. But do I think that identity politics played a part? Yes. I think that young people especially, I think that women especially, who are perhaps a bit more time poor and a bit more disengaged, just read the slogans and the news headlines and he's a racist and a woman hater and this, that and the other, and didn't actually look at the impact that voting the other way might have a couple of years down the track. And I think that's dangerous. I think it's dangerous for our family, for our communities, for small business, for our children. So yes. And you see it in America all the time. I mean, Trump is just the most polarising character. And everyone's got an opinion on him. And I'm not someone who's going to go and defend Trump, because there's so much that he says that I actually think really lacks character and really disappoints me. But when people say to me, oh, Trump, he's a such and such and such, and it usually is a racist, misogynist pig, I always stop and say, why? What did he say or do that you saw with your own eyes that made you think that of him? And can you not see any positive that he's trying to do for his nation? Has the identity blinded you from seeing the bigger picture? And that's the danger. I think that's seeping in big time around the Western world. We're being blinded to see the bigger picture. What is the way forward? I wish I knew.
Thank you for listening to the JJ podcast.